It's a well-established fact that humanity began in Africa. As we dive further into African history, we begin to see that some of the very first African populations came from a more eastern region within the continent. Migration patterns and human expansion across the continent aren't really a big focus when discussing African history, but ironically, migration patterns historically largely define what we see today, the Bantu expansion being the most popular. In theory, if it's true that some of Africa's oldest civilizations began in Eastern Africa and Africans inevitably moved throughout the continent, then we should expect to hear some oral history of other Africans claiming origin in the East. Interestingly enough, this is exactly what we observe. What up, African world? It's Home Team here, and I'm back at it with another video of African history, culture, and worldview. And remember, if you want access to courses, sources, or you simply want to support the Home Team in our new direction of animated projects, you can do so on patreon.com. The link is in the description box below. Today, we're going to talk about the oral accounts of 4 West African ethnic groups that claim they came from Eastern Africa. Contrary to popular belief, the overwhelming majority of all African ethnic groups we see today in their current geographical location came from somewhere else, whether this location was close or miles away. If we look at African ethnic groups from Western and Southern Africa, they all seem to have oral histories that point to a general Eastern African area. Many West African ethnic groups claim that they originated from the East, and some in the South even claim they came from a more northern area. For example, the Zulu and the Shona people of Southern Africa both claim they came from a more northern area, the Shona themselves specifically saying Tanzania. Now, this video is not to say that these particular Africans who claim an Eastern origin are actually Eastern Africans, as the people in West Africa today culturally and linguistically developed locally. Everything about the groups we will discuss are inherently West African, but their collective oral account speaks to the very core of African history and reveals the connections between African people. Now, there are many West Africans who claim origin in Eastern Africa, but their oral accounts are very broad and not necessarily worthy of note. But the West Africans we will speak of today have very striking oral accounts, not only concerning their origin in Eastern Africa, but some even name specific cities. It's also interesting that for one of these groups, their DNA has confirmed their Eastern African origin. The West Africans we'll be discussing today are well documented and confirmed by historians. So let's begin. Our first group is the Soninka. The Soninka are a Mande group in West Africa who are largely found throughout Senegal, Mali, Guinea, and Mauritania. They were the founders of the very first empire in Western African history. They built elaborate stone structures in Mauritania, which was pretty much the base of their civilization. The Soninka are interesting because not only do they claim an Eastern African origin, but they actually tell us a specific city. The Soninka claim that they migrated from Aswan, Egypt, or what they may have called Sonin, and this migration was apparently due in part because of the fall of Nile Valley civilization. Now, our second group is the Balanta. The Balanta people are the largest ethnic group in Guinea-Bissau today. The name Balanta means those who resist. Apparently, the word was coined by the Mandinka. As the Mandinka were expanding their state, they noticed that the Balanta were very difficult to contain, and thus the Mandinka word Balanto, meaning those who resist, began to be assigned to these people. Oral tradition amongst the Balanta tells us that they migrated westward from the area that is now Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia in order to escape drought and wars. The interesting thing about the Balanta is that oral tradition isn't the only thing that places their origin in Eastern Africa. The Balanta contain the M1 DNA marker that is commonly found in the Nile Valley and East Africa region. So at the very least, we can confirm that these West African people came from Eastern Africa. or more specifically, the Nile Valley. Our third group is the Songhai, and they probably have the most elaborate claim of them all. The Songhai are found primarily throughout Mali and the general Western African region. The Songhai people were the founders of the biggest empire in West African history, the Songhai Empire, and they absolutely stack up on specifics about their origin in Eastern Africa. They definitely have the strongest oral claim concerning their Eastern African origin. They might be the only West African group that speaks specifically about not only their origin, but their role and contribution to Nile Valley civilization. If you're an African history enthusiast, it certainly will give you goosebumps. The Songhai say that the people who later became known as the Songhai migrated specifically from Philae Island in ancient Nubia. One Songhai historian even named a city on their route, which went from Philae to Gao. You would think that the Songhai couldn't get any more specific, but the rabbit hole goes even deeper. In the Tariq-es-Sudan, which is the single most primary important document concerning the history of the Songhai Empire, the author confirms the specific role and contribution to Nile Valley civilization. After the Songhai migrated to West Africa in the city of Kokoya, the pharaoh called for some Songhai magicians to come to Egypt and perform. The city of Kokoya was well known for their magicians, and for an Egyptian pharaoh to have known them had to mean there was some sort of history of interaction at the very least. These claims of the Songhai are very specific and well documented. What's even more impressive, which further illuminates their claim, is the language of the Songhai, which some scholars assign as a Nilo-Saharan language and not Niger-Congo like their West African neighbors. So, to sum it all up, the Songhai claim a very specific place in ancient Nubia. Their primary historical documents confirm their interaction with the pharaohs of Egypt, and their language is not at all typical to West Africa. I would say the Songhai collectively have some of the best claims to a Nile Valley origin. For our final group, we have the Bamileke. The Bamileke are found largely in Cameroon. Interestingly enough, even though the Bamileke are found amongst what some scholars believe was the origin of the Bantu expansion, the Bamileke are characterized as only a semi-Bantu people. The Bamileke, like the Songhai, get pretty specific about their Eastern African origin. They claim they came specifically from Upper Egypt. They even have another specific piece of information that others don't have: a date. The Bamileke claim they left Upper Egypt in the 9th century, and after going to different areas, they finally settled in Cameroon in the 12th century. The Soninka, Balanta, Songhai, and Bamileke, out of all the West Africans, seem to have the strongest claim for a direct Eastern African origin. Despite their origins perhaps being from the East, these Africans ultimately created their great legacy in the West, even intermingling culturally, linguistically, and genetically with West African populations. Given the migration history of Africa, these stories were bound to exist amongst West African populations, and it's always interesting to see the parallels between these stories. Well, I'm all out, guys. If you like these videos and would like to support in its continued production, you can support the home team on patreon.com. The link is in the description box below. Know thyself. Remember your ancestors. Peace.